Recording in progress.
Good afternoon. We are preparing to start the session, A Look into Recycling Demographics and Contamination. I'm your moderator for today. I'm Heather Armstrong, Executive Director of Recycle Florida today, and thank you for joining us. Our first speaker is Dr. Joe England of the Solid Waste. He is the Solid Waste Assistant Division Manager of the City of Orlando. Joe will be sharing single and multifamily recycling participation, a multi-scale look into the influence of socioeconomic and demographic variables. One fun fact about Joe is he is an avid traveler. Most recently, he's visited Florence, Italy, the Virgin Islands, and we're excited to have you here today with us in Destin, Florida. Please join me in welcoming Joe England.
Thank you, Heather. All right, so this presentation, full disclosure, this presentation was compiled and worked on predominantly by Digna Rivera, who is, I'm gonna go out there and say genius. I've been working with her for probably about 3 years now, and just the amount of work that she does and the ideas that we come up with and the questions that she asks about recycling have really kind of generated a lot of questions in our area, really taken our office at the City of Orlando to, I guess, the next level to where we're able to start kind of engaging in conversations sort of larger than our region. So we've worked with a lot of partners now, just outside of our area in Central Florida, outside of the state, and on some kind of national scales too. So she really has been integral in asking questions that maybe in the past have been, sort of addressed anecdotally or wanting to really get a better understanding. So I wanted to give that out there before. So as I'm kind of giving this presentation and taking a lot of the credit for it, I want to make sure that that's not the case. Digna did a lot of this work, and we can follow up after if anybody has any questions. We can kind of direct them to Digna and our team back in Orlando. So she's missed today, but. All right, so without further ado, I guess I'll go get into this. It does sound kind of clunky as a title, but it is sort of, when you start breaking it down, it's questions that we all kind of have in our heads, and let's see what our research has showed us and what kind of avenues are there for us to move forward. Did that work? All right, that works. All right, so sort of is that me? There we go. All right, sort of the origin of this study was, it came from us asking questions and doing a study beforehand. So we all sort of address contamination in the same way. We know it's a problem. We wanted to get a little bit more of, and we were doing these at neighborhood levels, so we were getting a snapshot of one particular part of the city, and then not as confident in drawing what we're finding in that one part of the city across to be able to generalize it across other areas of the city. We all are familiar with the diversity of breakup in race, income across all of our cities or municipalities or wherever we live. So we wanted to really ask a question about the variables that are sort of outside of our control, sort of these external variables. How much do they actually influence the recycling that we're picking up, and how much does that influence participation? So what we really wanted to do was first determine what the recycling participation was in Orlando. As long as I've been at the city, we've always, since it's a voluntary single-family program, curbside program, we always just sort of anecdotally shot that out at 65%. We wanted to really nail down that number and give a kind of a clearer picture of what it looks like out there. Because obviously, as anybody knows that's in the waste industry or any kind of hauling operation, collection, that's critical because we need to know house counts so we can design routes and we can make sure that we're collecting as efficiently as possible. So first was let's determine participation at the city. Next, let's determine recycling participation based off of, or our participation rate based off of specific neighborhoods. So how does the the social demographics break up participation in the different parts of our city. And then next, whether there's a relationship between socioeconomic demographic variables across the neighborhood level, and that has to deal with, or what we looked at was income level, education attainment, home ownership, neighborhood year of build, race, ethnic origins, and how that works with in concert with participation. So what we did was we conducted a participation rate study. As they're defined here, a set-out rate is the participation of households that put their recycling container out on a single collection opportunity. So the average number of these carts picked up at any one time. So that just gives you a snapshot. We have a weekly collection in Orlando. So we have 95-gallon carts as well, so not every single household can fill up a 95-gallon cart. We have to take that into account, so what we did was apply a participation rate. So that participation rate is the amount of households that take part in at least once over 3 consecutive collection opportunities. So this is where Digna's real attention to detail came into play when designing this project, because it requires connecting participation back to the actual address itself. So more so than just kind of taking a generic neighborhood house count, or just going around, clicking the counter as we're driving past houses. She was actually connecting it back to this specific house, so that took a little bit more of a nuanced approach. Gave us a little bit more confidence when reporting on some of our findings. So with that, this goes back again to what we were talking about. A lot of the things we assume when it comes to participation, when it comes to the dynamics of a neighborhood or a city, these things that we assume may not have always been empirically backed. So what we try to do is really get a better idea of the questions that we want to ask, and then get confidence in the findings that we have. So we wanted to be able to say now, moving forward, like this particular neighborhood can have this more appropriate of approach with education if we use these types of materials. And with that came a lot of literature review, what's been written about, and how those studies have been analyzed and how those were reported on, and then how does that apply back to like a more municipal setting, not such a theory-based academic setting. So, and these are some of the things that have been written about. So, I mean, attitudes obviously impact participation in myself and every individual in this room, I'm sure, is the same way. What intentions, personal values, all these types of things that are hard to quantify, but definitely have been looked at through multi approaches through the more academic literature. So. Oh, I did that. It's very sensitive, guys. I'm sorry. All right. So, theoretical framework related to socioeconomic and demographic variables related to recycling participation. What we found, and this is across the literature, is higher income, higher recycling participation, education, the more education attained, the higher the participation, the age of houses, and the higher the participation. So that goes back to renters and versus the percentage of people own home ownership is kind of that reverse type of correlation. So what we found in the literature, we applied to what our findings were, and that's what we looked at as far as our variables go. So these are the kind of the neighborhoods that we selected. So if anybody is familiar with Orlando or has been to Orlando, it's an extremely neighborhood-based type of, I guess, understanding. So there's no area in Orlando that doesn't have some sort of applied neighborhood to it. So that goes even to where the airport is. We call that the airport neighborhood. Even though it has no actual residential areas, we break up the city into 70-something neighborhoods, and they're all and that's just for our own, I don't know, maybe that's a quirk of Orlando. I don't really have the origins of that. But if you look up in that top right part of that map, The red part is actually Orlando, so the municipal boundaries of Orlando. What it's inside is Orange County, which is about 5 times the size of the actual surface area of Orlando, which makes it a lot more of a, well, it has a lot more rural areas, a lot different dynamics than Orlando has. But as you can see, also with Orlando, it's a kind of a unique break, right? So there's that middle, that strong central middle part, and then a lot of the development is happening in that southeast portion, and that's all like Lake Nona, all the medical village, if anybody's been down in that area. But that's like incredibly rapid growth down there, so we're putting up neighborhoods at the extent that we can't keep up with actual ordering trucks and getting crews together to get through those neighborhoods. And if anybody's familiar with the collection now and kind of the way residential development's happening, is that nobody really wants to make the house anymore with the garage in the front where you walk your cart out and the streets are big and you can collect it very easily. Now everything's in tight little alleys behind houses and all the roads are different. Things aren't being designed the same way, so which makes collection a little more challenging, which makes house counts have to go down when you're planning routes and things like that. So with that, we excluded all the neighborhoods from that 70 plus list that have like the airport neighborhood that doesn't have any houses. So we set a floor at 100 houses so that we're able to kind of get a sample from that. And then out of those, we did a random sampling. So we picked these following 38 neighborhoods, and all of them, from that, we picked houses out of that. So we took a selective sample from each one of those 38 neighborhoods. And we got, as you can see, they're spread pretty well throughout the city. All right, so the procedure is over the course of about 24 months, so about 2 years, on the day of the assigned collection, so we pick up recycling once a week, each one of these neighborhoods, we spread that out over time, and we did essentially a participation rate study. So went out there, same roads, same, once every week, same neighborhoods, and then counted the amount of carts that were actually at the curb, and then tied that back to the house. So the same procedure was done across the 3 weeks, so we were able to kind of get that average participation, and then we applied other sources to that, which were our customer database. So we use our utility billing system for our customer database. We applied those addresses to that, kind of got a good house count using that source. We have an internal MapWorks system that we used, obviously Google Maps, because I think everybody uses Google Maps every single day of their lives for the most part. And then we applied census data from 2010, which is currently being updated with the most recent census, and then Orange County Property Appraiser. All right, so this is sort of a breakdown on how we calculated our participation rate, pretty much the standard way. So looked at the neighborhoods, broke it up for each neighborhood, took the amount of times for the set out of each house, and then took the average of those. So it's sort of a breakdown of one of our higher participating neighborhoods, which is Coy Town. And what we found was we have a lot lower participation rate than what we thought from the beginning. So as you may have heard, or before what I said, 65%, that was kind of what we were going at. That's how we were approaching, breaking up routes. That's how we were approaching a lot of this and it was more at the beginning sort of anecdotal. So we thought about 65%, and that's the best answer I've gotten from how those numbers were generated. So from this, we were able to determine that it's a lot lower than what we thought, and we can start kind of sharpening up our routes a little bit to make them a little bit more efficient. This is like an overview of what the participation rate is across the United States. I believe this comes from the recycling partnerships. Yep, stated the curbside recycling. And another thing, just to talk to this real quick, is that obviously if anybody knows about the recycling partnership, they've been doing this type of work for the last several years now. What we've always tried to do as when we're designing any kind of study is try to find out what's out there first and then sort of mirror what that methodology is, so that when we find things, we can hold them up against what research is already out there. By doing that, we you can kind of plug in what your research is, help out what they're doing, what their overall mission is, but then at the same time give a little bit more weight to what the findings we have, locally are. All right, so as I mentioned earlier, the independent variables that we picked were one, medium household income. So we were able to apply census data overlaid on top of the findings from each one of the neighborhoods' participation rates. And what we find kind of confirms what's in the literature is higher the medium income, higher the recycling participation. So we found a positive correlation between those two variables, at least across our city samples. Same thing with education attainment. Again, overlaying census data to the participation rates that we found in each one of our neighborhoods. We found a positive correlation again, more education attained, higher participation rate. Home ownership, on the other hand, again, in line with the literature, the higher rate of home ownership, or vice versa, the higher rate of rental, the lower the participation rate. And I know there's a lot of kind of assumptions that go along with that, but at least in this case, we're kind of confirmed some of the findings that were in literature. Now, one of the other variables that we picked to sort of question was this age of neighborhood. Orlando's got a wide, I guess, or a diversity of aged neighborhoods. So in our downtown area is a lot older neighborhoods, longer, kind of tighter streets, built in a different sort of time, built in a different decade. And then we have, like I was mentioning, our newer neighborhoods down in that southeast that are just built with no, maybe aesthetics first and no kind of rhyme or reason when it comes to solid waste collection. So what we, asking that question, is there any kind of at least understanding that we can apply to what this means, at least for participation? And what we found is a scatter map that looks like this. So we were unable to determine just based off of these two variables if there's any kind of correlation with that. It doesn't look like it from here, but there also are other things that we can ask to kind of support what we found there. Last variable is breaking and using census data to break up participation based off of race and ethnic origins in each one of the neighborhoods that we sampled. And here's the bar graph that you could see. Out of the kind of the spread, we have, these are each one of our neighborhoods. So you can see sort of a grouping. What we found was predominantly African-American neighborhoods participated in recycling less. Middle Hispanic origin neighborhoods, we found, or Hispanic ethnicity, we found sort of a mixture of participation hovering around that middle participation rate. And then predominantly white race neighborhoods, we found the highest participation rate. And then as you can see with this bar graph, there's sort of a neighborhoods that had more of a mixed Hispanic ethnic population and a white population had a little bit higher than average participation rate. So what we're able to determine from this, after everything's said and done, is we want to ask the question is why? Does this mean that we're not either providing access to certain neighborhoods? Are we not, and I don't have an answer for this, but are we not providing the right educational materials to, specific or culturally appropriate to each one of these different neighborhoods? The findings kind of ended up, like everything else, leaving you asking more questions, which I guess is the point of any good academic study, is research is never done. So what we had that we're able to pull from the literature, but then also kind of apply to what our findings were, are some of these barriers and motivators. These are predominantly from secondary sources. They're not our findings specifically. They're what we're able to kind of assume based off of what our findings are, and then apply to what the similar methodologies in other areas were, or other types of literature were. Now, with that though, by us identifying what the barriers as well as the potential motivators to participation in each one of these, in each one of our sample neighborhoods, we're able to say, let's test this a little bit further. So why is our predominantly African American neighborhoods have a lower participation rate? Is it because of like a lack of trust in the government or in our local government. We don't know. So what we can do with that is a lot more qualitative type of sampling, or a lot more qualitative type of methodologies, surveying, focus groups, and these are things that you kind of throw out there. But we're a lot more like, because you can always say, okay, let's go sample the population, find out what that is. We have and what I'm finding very fortunate in the area that I work is that we have a lot of support in those types of methodologies, and this is really taken seriously in our area, in our government, in Orlando for I guess that appreciation of wanting to understand. We want to be able to create that baseline, and this is something that is actually taken seriously. So when we present things like this to our Office of Communications and Neighborhood Relations, they're in. They're all right. What kind of support do you guys need? So it's really encouraging to see that, which I would not have said, or I would not have probably thought or perceived about government prior to being part of, my job now, is that there's an actual want to understand what these motivators are, what are our limitations, what exists out there now, so that we can make this better and approach it in a way that's efficient and is smart. So what we found ultimately, or what we conclude, is that sort of the variables that I was talking about, so include that household income, education level, home ownership, and racial ethnic origin profile of a neighborhood have moderate influence. So as the classic academic finding, that tells you, this is what it is, or this is what we've kind of already assumed. And then the neighborhood year of build didn't really have any obvious impact on participation. Obviously, also, a wider study is needed to establish the study variables that can, how the variables that we're looking at impact each other. So that requires a little bit more of a systematic approach or a synergistic approach, taking maybe home ownership and race and ethnic origin, and seeing if there's any correlation that weighs participation in some way or the other. And then obviously qualitative research to support what we found through more of the statistical analysis. And then how does this contribute to the wider, I guess, mission that we have? It is to tailor education. So I know that's sort of the fallback each time when we talk about why we do this, why we put forth this effort in advance, and but it is true, because we design at the city, and even with my experiences, is that we design educational material across the board like everybody is the same, when in reality we all know everybody isn't the same. We absorb information differently, we perceive it through our own cultural lens, and some things that you put out there aren't necessarily going to resonate with somebody else. So what we're really trying to do is break that up a little bit, or kind of like deconstruct it a little bit, to be able to really make the most of our education dollars, make the most of our educational resources, and really tailor it in a way that is going to be most effective. And then these results are also important because they're also paying attention to social inequities or inequalities, and then potentially acting as barriers and increasing recycling. So as you can see, we have a relatively low recycling participation rate, when in reality, we thought it was a lot higher. So with that, we have identified at least areas of the city that have lower participation, and we can start, I guess, approaching those areas in a way that can potentially increase that. Now, if it's a cultural barrier against it across the board, there's no real entry level or no real entry point for that, but I want that to be, I want that experience to be the one that informs that, not because we didn't try to do it. So I think that's the end. Yep. So thank you, guys. Appreciate listening to that.
Thank you, Joe. One thing that I learned is there are always ways to grow and educate, especially when you're sharing about the participation level that he hoped for and the participation level that he had. So very interesting. At the very end of both of our talks, we're going to have an opportunity for you to engage with our speakers and ask any questions that you may have. So as Joe was sharing, hopefully you were taking notes, and at the end, after Cynthia shared, we're going to give you an opportunity to ask questions of our speaker. Next, we have Cynthia Mormile, and Cynthia is with MSW Consultants, and she is going to share identifying and addressing contamination in recyclables. So once you have your participation rate, how do you help them to make sure that it's clean? One interesting thing about Cynthia is she is excited to get back home to her confidant, someone who she says is provides consultation to her, and it is her 70-pound cat, Rocco. Please join me in welcoming Cynthia. And it's Rocky, actually. Rocky.
Thank you. She asked us that interesting fact a while ago, and I'm like, well, I'm anxious to get back about our cat. But, you know, during the pandemic, he's a very good listener. He's a very good coworker right there by you. But glad to be here today and share a few things about some of the work that we do. MSW Consultants, if you're not familiar with us, out of Orlando, but we work all across the country doing a lot of waste characterization studies, auditing, both commercial sector, but a lot of governmental projects for statewide surveys to countywide, a lot of different material stream, recycling optimization studies. I come from the background of being an operations manager I was at a city for over 20 years, so I bring a lot of the operations evaluations parts to the operation, and then we do rate studies to help you figure out how to financially best manage your system. But several of the items you see there, we have projects going all the time with the different staff members that we have. But today's presentation, I want to do just a brief touch on the recycling influencers that we've seen in the last few years, because that's what a lot of we've heard here already yesterday and through the different presentations that were very good. Methods to measure and address the recycling is what I'm going to focus on. And then if any of you have got any programs that you'd like to share about or know, be glad to hear about that at the end, and then just do a wrap up. So recent recycling contamination influencers, I think this tops, like I said yesterday, the folks talking from the industry of the brokers and the processing end, the economics gentleman yesterday morning. Commodity mix has been changing through the evolving ton of the difference in the materials. So the CP manufacturing guy gave good detail on that and how you have to tweak your equipment and everything. Broad-based conversion from open-top recycling bins to lidded carts. Eliminated the quality control. It was really focused mostly on the collection side because brings in more material, diversion, focus on that, and then the collection is easier to retain your staff. They aren't out there manhandling it. Get it to the collector, however, and then you start hitting the blocks, and then it kind of brings to the people that we've been marketing it to for years start saying it's getting too much. So the China sword eliminated a lot of the export opportunity. The markets take a hit. People start having to pay for recycling. It becomes less attractive from the governmental side of things or the management of your system, and you get higher tip fees. Last year it sort of rebounded from that perspective, but have we really taken the right steps to help the contamination? Like they're having to put in a lot of very expensive systems, as you heard, for the robotics and things of that nature. But I come from the Midwest where you don't have millions of population. I mean, we were the regional MRF for maybe a couple 100,000 total in mid-Missouri area if you weren't in the St. Louis or Kansas City area. So you can't always economically justify what it takes to get those material streams clean after they're at the facilities. So who's putting the material out? That's what we want to help identify and focus on. These are some pictures of examples that the Recycling Partnership, I think you've heard their name a few times, they do fund a lot of really good research and projects trying to get the contamination under control. If you go back a few years before, and even now, they help fund the conversion to the carts in many communities to try to help get more capture of the materials. So these are just some examples that they have provide. This one is actually from Waste Management, but it's used widely in quite a few publications. But that's, you know, that's why you don't want the bags and the tanglers, other tanglers in your materials. It's very costly, takes downtime, it's very hazardous to be in there cutting those out. I mean, we are one of the top dangerous industries, right? That's why we focus on the safety and the insurance costs associated with it and things that we've already heard about. So the material characterization and capture rate aspect of this presentation deals with how much are we actually recycling of the, or capturing of the recyclables. So it's key to measure both from the same universe of materials, both your trash and your recycling, to know how much of the recyclables are contaminated and how much of the trash still has recyclables in it. And then there's calculation at the end. Best times to study a capture rate would be before or after a program change. Like, it's very common, becoming more common, that the recycling partnership will help people measure before they implement the carts, and then again afterwards, so that they get this data. Or even if it's locally, do it before and after a major education campaign to maybe some of your neighborhoods, or, you know, things of that nature. Before negotiating MRF processing contracts, and that comes from the perspective of both the community as well as the MRF. I mean, the MRFs may be serving 5 counties. I believe the gentleman from Michigan, is that right? Yesterday, the county that had the Solid Waste Authority now servicing the different counties, and once again, a lot of times you'll end up with different tipping fees and things. So negotiating that from that perspective, or from a city, if you feel like your material's cleaner, you're working very hard at it, and you need to negotiate a better contract, it's good for the community to know from that perspective. So we were doing a large-scale waste characterization study for SERC, Solid Waste Authority of Central Ohio, back in 2019. And in planning that endeavor, I guess some of the communities of SERC were able to secure some of the funding from the recycling partnership to merge their systems to an automated cart collection. So it was a very good opportunity to do the capture rate measurement alongside our larger waste characterization study, which was system-wide, basically, what's coming to their facilities. The research, again, by the recycling partnership for this aspect, the SERC was paying us for the large characterization study. 2 cities, Gahanna, I believe, I'm not sure if that's how you pronounce it, Reynoldsburg, going from the 18-gallon bins to the 64-gallon carts. So it's the opportunity to measure the impact of going from the bins to the carts, but also comparing methods to measure the capture rate, which was the new aspect that they were excited to hear about. So I have kind of a map of that area with the 2 pointed out with, let's see. That's just the communities in the relationship. But both communities in their 30,000s, households around 10,000, little different median household income, and they had their tonnages, annual tonnages per year already in their data bank. So this was the part that a recycling partnership was interested in, seeing the difference in the back of truck grab sampling that we do typically in our waste characterization study. We're greeting the truck at the MRF or the landfill and getting details on it, how different things about the load, has it been in commercial neighborhood, residential neighborhood, things like that, and then catching the minimum sample sizes that we do out on the projects are according to ASTM standards, 200, 250 pounds for the trash, 125 to 150 pounds for recyclables. So that's the common, the back of truck is the common method that we use a lot. The curbside, though, was a new opportunity that we were able to do from going to particular addresses that were identified from season to season and getting their back of truck, they take their carts, I mean not back of truck, but taking the cart actually, contents, bagging that up, taking it back. So there was a lot of labeling and sampling details involved. And then, so totally we did 323 households with the recycling set-outs during that time. So you would have had to capture a household that had both trash and recycling out. So both methods, we do the same sorting on the same table. You just have a lot of data that you're tracking to keep track of what load, what neighborhood, what actual household, if it was that curbside sampling. You do sorting into however many categories are predefined with your client, weighing out the material, data recording, repeat. So we've got each sample, all the data, then go ahead. So they would have been doing that for each household sample as well in that separate type of curbside. So 65 materials had been identified for the overall study. This is a picture of what we use on our tablets. We've developed a cloud-based app because doing this in numerous places, several projects at a time, several different customized material category plans. This is the way we manage the data, and we actually have this available now to like help set up a MRF to do your own auditing periodically and use our cloud and the data to pull back the information to measure your progress. So this is how we record the weights after it's weighed out, and then it's taken back to the office, or it's available there for the analysis and reporting afterwards. So the findings were the recyclables discarded in the trash decreased both by both methods, back of truck and from the same curbside measurement. So it went from the gray area is the trash, went from 77% to 86%, which means your recyclables went down that people were putting out in the trash. So goal number one, that's what they're hoping. And then the recycling capture rate, which is from your measuring of both placements and then calculating how much you actually captured in the recycling stream correctly the second time, they increase. So that's good. By both methods, they're validating each other throughout this process. But the before the cart is the top line, and the bottom line is the after the cart. So good results. The contamination rate in the recyclables, however, increased as well. That's the deal with the carts, right? So it just gives people more volume. Maybe they think, oh, more plastics. Isn't that what everybody thinks? They can just get rid of every plastic in the recycling, but no. So pre-cart went up about 2.2%, post-cart, the contamination in the recycling. So again, you also lose the hope that if there are communities where the collectors see a lot of contamination at the 18-gallon bin, they can tag it or leave it or some kind of education from that. You lose that with the cart as well. Now, some of the new robotics and cameras that are coming out there, it's hopeful that in the future they'll be able to depict that when that cart tips. I know there are some programs working on that right now. So comparing the methods, good for measuring the overall program performance. From back of truck and the curbside, good for measuring individual customer behavior. So that's where you get into more targeted education can come from knowing that, but at the back of truck, you pretty well know the area they've covered, but it could be, if it's a small community, it could be the entire community. So it's not as good for your targeted education. So how we do some programs to address the direct behavior at the curb to try to help that capture rate from step 1 to step 2 is a container monitoring program. So this is another project that we got involved with originally because of the recycling partnership funding. So Orange County, Florida, which is the area surrounding Joe's City, which you saw the outer map is Orange County, and 2-3 years ago, I guess they were able to get funding. They did a pilot program themselves and decided no way they can take this very widespread with their internal staff, a lot of staffing shortages, other things that staff needs to do. But they did a pilot, then they applied for the TRP funding, got that, and then they put out a big contract to try to get the support for the labor. So what we ended up winning that contract, and we still today manage the ongoing cart monitoring project for Orange County, Florida. There's 4 cart monitors go out every day. Now, during their grant period, sometimes it might have been 14 cart monitors, so it's a little different depending on how many households they had predetermined for each phase. But before the monitoring, you got to recruit a team, select the routes, which God bless them, the Orange County staff does that every period, and like going into the grant, I think they sort of had that already predetermined determined for the first several months, but since then, they do it as they move forward each time, give us those routes ahead. Hauler coordination is critical with whoever you do this project for. It has to be somebody usually from the entity. So Orange County has a key staff member that's out there coordinating with the haulers. We also did a project for Apopka, Florida, and they actually haul their own. So it was their supervisor we're communicating, and he was calling his own guys on the truck, stay out of this neighborhood until they get their carts tagged. The measuring contamination at the MRF, if possible, before you implement this program so that you can kind of get that capture rate that tells the story to your community leaders and hopefully can get further support for the benefits of doing the cart monitoring. During the active cart monitoring, households receive visible direct feedback for 3 to 4 weeks in a row. So they will define the routes, we get maps, we assign the teams, they go out and do this. Maybe 500-600 houses is a max they can get ahead of a collection vehicle for each shift. The haulers must not lap the monitors, and I can say a couple years into this, they have a lot of substitute haulers or rental trucks that don't have the GPS on it that the county can watch. So we do have more issues now with them collecting ahead of us or getting in before we can get around. But it's critical, and a lot of these programs may just be for 1 or 2 phases if it's a grant project only. So different things to watch out for. After the monitoring, decide to continue with additional neighborhoods or reperform the same neighborhoods. Remeasure the MRF contamination rate. So once you have so many months figured out, you want to go back in and do a capture rate study. That's another thing that the TRP has helped fund in a couple situations. But we are now 2 years into it with Orange County. I think they're looking at eventually going back into other neighborhoods that we were there before. But Joe may know the number. I know it's a very high percentage rental in, is it 60, 70% or something in Orange County are rentals? Or maybe it's different in Orlando too. But anyway, very high because of the, I don't know why. It's the student population, it's migrating population, I'm not sure, but very high number of rentals. And so even if we go back into these neighborhoods that we did 2 years ago, you can't really say those people regressed automatically because you're not going to know if it's the same people that lived there the time before. But synchronized education and communications is important. And again, the Recycling Partnerships makes these items available to anyone to do your own project, and you can customize them to your need. They suggest a mailer that goes out, like if you've got a utility mailer or just postcard to each address. They have the feedback tags that are used to attach to the carts. Just a lot of good educational information that they have out there on their website if you know communities that could use that. So standard tagging protocol, you would have a great job tag to give some positive reinforcement, or then 2 tags for the oops. The first one, unless it's a hazardous item, you just get a warning. If you this next week have not corrected that, they actually will reject the collection. So we have different methods of rejecting that collection, leaving it at the curb so that they will pay attention to the feedback. Typical daily workflow, they'd come to our office for the Orange County project, but we did one up in Philadelphia, and you rented for a 6-week period an office. You know, that's part of the project when it's being handled by a consultant, is to set that up. But typically they got to get there and got to get to the route. So we have some come in about 5:45, 6 o'clock to get to the route by 7. That's just how it's been established with our client, because if you go too early, a lot of people are still putting out their setouts before they go to work. There must be about 4 to 5 hours of tagging you can get ahead of the collector, usually before they're going to catch up to you and maybe try to pass you, especially if they're not being watched closely. But there must be close coordination with the hauler, again, every time. Very important for the PPE, they're touching just the lids. They don't dig down in the carts or anything, but you're touching a lot of lids, and you don't want the perception of neighbor to neighbor to neighbor. So, and after COVID, they were wearing masks and just being safe, high vis, telling them a lot of training up front, telling them where not to walk, what things you might be looking out for, snakes or this or that. So just some training up front to make sure the teams are understanding what they might be getting into, because a lot of times it's a college kid working part-time because it's early morning hours, or somebody that's even retired looking for part-time work. We've had a lot of different things, but make sure everything's in a protocol so that they're not, I guess, aloof out there. I mean, we had people at one time pick up a stray dog, try to get it to somebody, and I was like, no, you know, call animal control maybe or something, but not that. Monitoring apps and the user interface, this is something that blows my mind with the developments over the years. Rubicon, I don't know if you've heard of them, they do all sorts of different projects and things with cities and smart functions, but we do utilize their app that they developed, and we work closely with them for uploading each session, each time. We have our own devices, and they provide the app with the neighborhoods, and it's very, I mean, you go through each household and it'll populate, and then you put the status. It will bring forth the history from the previous weeks. Very user friendly, as long as you've got cell phone service. If you're not, it sort of delays, and then you take a picture of the bad things, and it takes a while for it to upload. But the people getting the calls in Orange County customer service, within a few minutes, will be able to see what was the problem. So they are getting calls and follow-up, and they'll be able to see it from their dashboard. So that's pretty good system. The performance metrics, what are we looking at? Participation and set-out rates. And what they found is interesting compared to Joe's, because a lot of times, each 4-week phase, we've got the participation rate, because it's actually tracked by address, and we actually have set-out rates. So set-out rates sometimes are up to 70% in a lot of these neighborhoods, but participation rate a lot of times 70 to 80% on the average overall. So it's interesting contrast. But clean versus contaminated set-outs, we have a lot of analyticals. We give them every phase for what type of contamination is in there. What's the guess of what's the number one contaminant every month? It's the plastic bags, wrap, and film. That's one of their categories. And then by incidents, like how many times. We also tell them the regressed households, like if they were good 1 week but then got an oops, anytime within that 4-week period, they regress. So maybe they really just got lucky that first time, or their other items were buried below. We don't dig in it. But so anyway, it gives you a good idea of the recyclables quality. The sustainable recycling programs of the future, we believe, have a sufficient designated budget for things to help minimize the contaminations. Ongoing public education, I think we've heard that a few times in the last day and a half, that it's got to be in front of them for them to get it. It's all I can say is, like, it's not a once told, always learn. I mean, it's expanded over the years to where so many things are acceptable in some people's program, and the number of materials that are out there in the industry of the plastics especially, just very confusing to people. I really like the Connecticut model because the state is in agreement, but look how little the state is. You know, it's a little different, and they sort of have kind of control or oversight over the facilities up there too. So anyway, they've got a centralized system, but I know these ladies from the state here do the best they can do to help the situation. But the cart bin monitoring programs, we think that's important. It is being shown effective by the time they go through the 4-week phase, whereas they have a 30% threshold. A lot of times their loads are acceptable by the end of the phase, as opposed to being rejected that first week or two. So they are seeing that. And then doing that routine inbound composition at the MRF for your loads, whether you're doing it with cart monitoring or not, we think that's information that would be good for people that are working with contracts or in the marketing of the material, either way. So key program considerations. Do you outsource or in-house the labor? I think we've heard presentations before with some of the counties that have enough staff and they are working on their own programs. There have been small programs like the pilot test where other communities are able to use volunteer staffing, which is awesome. You've got a really engaged volunteer group or a recycling organization of some sort that could put that to it. Size of the community, because the scale matters on how much effort you're going to have to fund versus maybe, and how long it might take and things like that. Getting an app technology or going the old school hard copy. That's what the county did to begin with on their pilot, was use the hard copy paper, and they found out how labor intensive that is to go back and have somebody else re-enter the data. So this takes care of it. It's also immediately available to those fielding the calls, things like that. Printing and the mailing cost. We did have one program that did not put the great job tag out first. It was a cost savings that allowed them to do another extra neighborhoods because they just printed 2 tags rather than the 3. And then also going 3 weeks or 4, that's been something that kind of varies. You can try to do it 3 weeks. We do still see an incremental change between week 3 and 4, but it's not as, it really drops off after that when they did their pilot program. So that's why they asked for 4 weeks for us. Guidelines for effective program. Ongoing monitoring with trained personnel, and even if you got turnover, make sure they get the training, they're paired up with somebody. I know some of the programs now even have just monitors, one person managing the tags and the handhelds, but I think in a lot of communities it's a safety factor, keep them paired up for numerous reasons. Rotate monitoring around different neighborhoods so you get the contrast. In Orange County, like they give that to us, but they have tried to represent every area from a commissioner to make sure there's data coming back to the leadership for decision making. But in bold, establish implications for misbehaviors. You know, they can do this however long they want. They can reject the cart however many times they want to reject it. But if they cannot take the cart away or have some implication to the person that refuses to change their behavior, that's a problem that we see. So there are communities cross country that I've heard in other meetings that they've got that right there. You know, like this is an optional service that is included in your monthly fee, but it says right in our guidelines, it's for this material, you know, so they can yank the cart and have the educational, they can go through some educational retraining and be able to get their cart back, I guess, and start in through it again. But I think you're going to have some kind of implication, or it's just not effective. You can keep doing the same thing over and over. So that's the end of mine. Have questions? Thank you.
Thank you, Cynthia and Joe. And now I'm going to take this out because I'm going to walk around with you. Now we are to one of the best parts of the program. We've had one of the best, our 2 speakers, and now we're going to play Let's Make a Deal to some degree. We aren't going to ask for peppermint or paper clips in the bottom of your purse or pocket, but we are going to ask you to give some questions to our speakers if you have any. So Joe and Cynthia, they were talking about we already have one. So, no, you know what they were talking about, but now is the perfect time. But what I am going to promise is that you're going to be out of here in 6 minutes. So if you have your question, you need to ask it now because we are going to turn the mic off in 6 minutes. So our first question is from
Karen Moore, Florida Department of Environmental Protection. Great presentations, both of you all. And this is to both of you in different respects, you know, looking at the socio-economic demographics and looking at contamination and how to increase participation and how to decrease contamination. And I know you guys said you're probably still working on some of this, but are you considering reaching out to the schools, especially in some of the lower participation areas or higher contamination areas? Because we know how much schools how much kids they influence their parents, and especially getting them early, but even the middle school, high schools, to try to educate at that area. So is that a consideration?
Yeah. You want to talk about that?
No, go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. So that was one of the first, approaches that our Office of Communications and Neighborhood Relations suggested to us after presenting this material out. So a unique story is we have a predominantly Hispanic ethnic neighborhood that has pretty much a school attached to the neighborhood. What we found just through the sort of that outreach at the school and going to neighborhood meetings is that there's at least specific to this neighborhood, there's multi-generational house makeup. So how we're approaching this neighborhood is more of like, go to the HOA meetings, discuss at the school, but also be present on social media. So there's no real outlet of approach that isn't you know, is kind of off limits for certain neighborhoods that we're looking at. And then there's also neighborhoods that we found where social media is just a non-existent even approach. So yeah, definitely the schools kind of worked with us, at least in our area, because we are in Orange County, and we can only really approach schools in our jurisdiction, but they've definitely been more than willing to bring us in and talk, so that's great.
I know Orange County does that as well, because they've got a project, even touring or this or that, but I think unless they take it home and force their parents into it. It's like
Dan Fowler from Shell Polymers. I'm part of the Society for Plastics Engineers. This isn't a question, it's more of a comment. What we're trying to focus on are the teachers. So teach the teachers, and then it goes from there. It continues on. My question is related to Orlando. I visit there quite often, and you have a massive concentration of timeshares and condos and places like that. So you're talking about homes. It'd be interesting, I don't know the demographics as to the number of homes versus timeshares and condos. How do you propose to address that massive concentration?
Yeah, thank you. That's I was hoping to be able to address this, because it's in the title, and we were hoping to have some of that research that we're doing right now specific to multifamily properties. So we have about like a 50-50 split, maybe a little bit more of our residents living in apartments, condos, maybe not so much the vacationers. We're really concentrating on, because at the end of the day, Orlando, outside, the greater Orlando is more of that timeshare type of vacationers, sort of empty nester, not empty nester is the wrong word, snowbird type of population. In Orlando, though, it's about that 55 to 45 split with single family to multifamily properties. So with that, we just received more funding from the Recycling Partnership to focus specifically on low to moderate income multifamily properties and the best like entry levels for education and increasing participation. We have implemented a mandatory commercial multifamily recycling ordinance. Over the last 3 years, it's been phased in, and this is our biggest population as we're entering into 2023, all the rest of the existing properties. So we're seeing a lot of the smaller multifamily properties having to come on board and get in compliance with this recycling program. So have gotten a lot of support. We've hired on additional staff to be able to address that specific. I mean, as you can see, it's not as easy as, you know, identifying a house. There's a specific population in that house. You can kind of do like a one-on-one. With multifamily, you're getting a variety of recycling stream that it's really hard to tie back to a specific unit. So we're doing that through composition studies of just multifamily properties and finding out what that stream looks like, and then approaching it from that way. And sort of the same thing where we're just kind of throwing a lot of things at it. So providing totes and providing tailored education to different properties, and then going back and studying what those impacts have been. So, but right now there's no real, we're just trying to get that snapshot of what it looks like and then address it that way.
Very good. Well, while he was sharing, my alarm did go off, so we are going to just do one bit of participation. By show of hands, how many of you on your best day feel that you are a good recycler? Good. Take that with you. Educate someone who might need your help. Thank you for joining the session today. I hope to see you tomorrow. If not, have a safe trip home to wherever you're traveling. And thank you for joining us. Take care.